Welcome to this video about an introduction to dyslexia, part 2 of 4, identifying signs. Who has the appropriate qualifications to identify dyslexia? Dyslexia can be assessed and identified by an educational psychologist or an accredited and registered Level 7 Dyslexia SPLD specialist assessor. A qualified psychologist with another specialism, for example, a clinical psychologist, may also carry out cognitive assessments, which may identify some specific cognitive difficulties. In this video, we are focusing not on the formal assessment or labelling of dyslexia, but on the identification of signs of dyslexia within the graduated approach as part of routine school SEN processes and provisions. Development of literacy skills. Let's now start to think about the typical development of literacy skills. Earliest writing. Most children start pretend writing even before they have any idea that writing represents the sound patterns of words. Their earliest writing may consist of repeated squiggles or repeated sequences of letter-like forms. They may also have a message in mind and may be able to tell you what the message is if you ask them as they are writing. But if asked later, they will probably reinvent a different message. Phonological awareness. Once most children begin to understand the alphabetic principle, words are made of sounds and these sounds can be written down as letters, their attempts at writing change. They begin to segment words into constituent phonemes and write down the letters that represent these sounds. Now messages are recoverable from the writing itself. In the absence of teaching, children tend to first gain the ability to segment the first phoneme in a word or syllable. In dog, they would write first D, the DG, the dog. However, now all young children are taught letters and sounds which accelerate their segmenting abilities, and this can increase the accuracy of their early phonological spellings. Beyond phonology. There is more to spelling than phonology. Most children begin to notice morphological features. Morphology refers to the structure of words and parts of words such as stems, root words, prefixes, and suffixes. Most children are then able to incorporate this knowledge into their spelling. They also start to notice spelling conventions. For example, many pick up on the fact that the A spelled A sound is in the middle of a word, but the A sound is at the end. Tricky words. Even the most irregular of English words contain some phonological clues. However, this is insufficient information to guarantee correct spelling. The tricky bits of these words need to be taught and learned. Expansion of vocabulary. All young people of secondary school age are still learning to spell, as they are presented with a range of new and more technical vocabulary. Young people need to learn not only the meanings of new words, but also need sufficient opportunities to practice spelling the words until correct spelling is automatic and fluent. Spelling and reading compared. What does spelling require? Spelling requires recall. Reading requires recognition. And recall is harder than recognition. Why is spelling even harder than reading? Feel could be spelt F-E-A-L, or F-I-E-L, or F-E-Y-L, using different spellings of the E phoneme. Spelling and writing. Read the message below. Like with reading, the secretarial skill of spelling needs to be automatic so that the writer can concentrate on the words and meanings they are trying to convey. Spelling for dyslexic pupils. Spelling is one of the most common and persistent difficulties for dyslexic pupils. It's not entirely understood why this is the case. It is known that dyslexia impacts phonological processing and memory. This means that dyslexic individuals can have difficulty hearing phonemes, that is, the small sounds in words, and can't break words down into smaller parts in order to spell them. Many pupils with dyslexia find it difficult to learn how letters and sounds correspond to each other, and may not be able to recall the right letters to be able to spell the sounds in words. The complexity of the English language means that dyslexic pupils also struggle to remember irregular spelling patterns and sight words such as the, said, and was. Reading for dyslexic pupils. For dyslexic pupils who have difficulties learning to read, the effort needed to concentrate can be exhausting and can often lead to frustration and reluctance to try to learn. Some dyslexic pupils experience visual difficulties, which can make it appear that the text is moving or blurring on the page. Note, if this is the case, a sight test with an optometrist is essential. The implications of slow, laboured reading are far-reaching and can impact a pupil throughout their education. Word reading. Understanding the alphabetic principle, knowing grapheme-phoneme correspondences, and blending phonemes are skills that are difficult to acquire for dyslexic pupils. English is hard. Green, bead, thief, pediatrician, and the same letters can be pronounced differently in different words. Bead and bread. And there are many words that violate all of the rules. Decoding skills and reading comprehension. If word reading is slow, readers might not be able to give sufficient attention to what is being read. If word reading remains effortful, dyslexic pupils may not develop efficient strategies for reading comprehension because of limited practice and low print exposure. It is therefore important to monitor the development of reading comprehension, as well as monitoring development of their decoding skills. The good news, however, is that most dyslexic pupils can learn to read well with the right support. Writing for dyslexic pupils. Difficulties with organising writing. Short-term memory, including working memory, is used to hold thoughts in the brain while you write them down. A combination of short-term memory and slow, effortful writing means that pupils with dyslexia often struggle to organise their writing. Other common writing difficulties. As we have outlined, problems with spelling are enduring characteristics of dyslexia. Dyslexic pupils may also experience some of these difficulties. Problems with forming letters. Writing at a very slow pace. Writing is untidy or tidy but slow. Difficulties with note-taking. Same word spelled differently in one piece of work. Repetition of words and phrases. Foreshortening. Poor letter formation. That is, incorrectly formed, incorrect ascenders or descenders. Use of capital letters in the body of text. Each line begins further from the margin. Difficulty in sitting letters on the line. And content does not match oral ability. Possible attention difficulties for dyslexic pupils. Short-term memory problems can lead to a pupil appearing inattentive. However, this may not be the case. It is possible that the pupil has forgotten an instruction or a question. To copy from a board, a pupil must take in and retain information in their short-term memory while they write it down. This is usually done phonologically, but this requires the word reading and spelling skills affected by dyslexia. If reading and spelling are very poor, a pupil may rely on visual memory instead. But this is a significantly slower method. What might you notice in lessons that could indicate the possibility of dyslexia? Difficulties with copying from the board. Difficulty writing notes at speed, planning and writing essays, and completing work on time. Difficulty following instructions and directions. Misunderstanding multi-step questions. Difficulties with sequencing, reading a timetable, and using a dictionary. Difficulty concentrating or easily distracted. Difficulty with fact retrieval under pressure. difficulty holding on to and manipulating information, word-finding difficulties, and difficulties with self-organisation and attention. Dyslexia and possible difficulties with maths. Dyslexia can occur in association with dyscalculia. This is a specific and persistent difficulty in understanding numbers. Co-occurrence of learning difficulties appears to be the rule rather than the exception, and is believed to be a consequence of factors that are shared between areas of difficulty, for example, working memory. However, it should not be assumed that all dyslexics have problems with mathematics, although the percentage may be very high, or that dyscalculics have problems with reading and writing. Possible indicators of dyslexia in maths lessons and activities. In maths lessons or activities requiring maths, you may notice these difficulties that could be indicative of dyslexia and/or dyscalculia. Mental calculations are difficult. Number shape confusion. Symbol confusion. Transposing numerals when copying. Difficulty spelling and/or reading mathematical terminology. Difficulty spelling numbers, order of working, and problem solving. Inability to retain and remember times tables. Difficulty telling the time. Poor memory for retaining instructions involving numbers and calculations. Difficulties with automaticity and estimation. Difficulty following a method and categorizing. And difficulties with spatial awareness. An inconsistent profile. All individuals have relative strengths and preferences. Usually, however, non-dyslexic pupils produce a profile of performance that is reasonably consistent across a range of tasks. This might be generally reflected also in their attainment and rates of progress across the curriculum. In the case of a dyslexic pupil, an inconsistent profile would be expected. The expectation would be that on tasks relating to literacy, phonological processing, memory, etc., a dyslexic individual would perform significantly worse than expected, and that their results, when compared to pupils who are similar in terms of age, etc., are lower. Historically, this was called a spiky profile. It is more accurate, however, to call this an inconsistent profile of performance that is unexpected when compared with an individual's cognitive ability, that is, their basic intelligence or level of innate ability. Information within the school that is routinely available. You can spot pupils who are presenting with dyslexic-type difficulties in your lessons. Additional sources of teacher-held and class-based evidence includes attainment and progress data for subjects studied, baseline testing data, behaviour and engagement data and information, pupil work samples, and views provided by the pupil and/or their parents and carers during meetings. Considering additional needs and factors at an early point. If a pupil is currently presenting with literacy and possibly also maths difficulties, attention difficulties, and an inconsistent profile, this does not necessarily mean that they are dyslexic. At this early stage, it can be considered a possibility. Some factors to consider. How old is the pupil? Are they under 7? Is this possibly developmental? Were there gaps in the pupil's education history? Are there possibly any emotional or social factors which are causing barriers to learning? Is the pupil learning English as an additional language? And are they experiencing visual stress? Other areas of SEN that might also need some exploration or clarity include speech and language needs, autism, SEMH needs including, for example, ADHD and anxiety, vision impairment, hearing impairment, sensory processing and integration difficulties, or other areas of SPLD, for example, dyspraxia. Spotlight on speech and language needs. Language consists of 4 interacting subcomponents: phonology, semantics, syntax, and pragmatics. Preschool children with delayed language are at an increased risk of developing literacy difficulties. The phonological processing difficulties of pupils with dyslexia may therefore be considered a language difficulty. There is strong evidence of overlaps between developmental language disorder and dyslexia. If the articulation of words and sounds are inaccurate and full of errors, then spelling also becomes very problematic for the pupil. Considering visual stress. Some pupils experience visual stress, known as Mears-Erlin syndrome, if assessed by an optometrist. Signs include letters or words go fuzzy or blurry. Letters or words float, move, or disappear. Letters or words appear side by side or on top of each other. Letters or words merge. The white of the page dominating, pulsating, or moving. Headaches when reading. Reading makes eyes hurt or sore. Getting tired after a few minutes. Seeing lights or colours around letters or words. Reading makes eyes water and may need to rub them. And losing place when reading. There are a range of basic screeners available. The most common aids are colour overlays, colour reading rulers, coloured paper, and filters on computer screens. These can be used in daily lessons and in exams as reasonable adjustments. Optometrists can also prescribe tinted lenses. Some dyslexic pupils experience visual stress. It is important to recognise, however, that visual stress and dyslexia are not the same thing. Taking a deeper look. If you have raised concerns about a pupil and you are spotting signs of difficulties that could be associated with dyslexia, it can be helpful to provide additional or more specific information, review routinely available school data, and administer tests of specific skills, for example, literacy, numeracy, and handwriting, to provide additional information. In lessons. Following, preceding, or alongside the activities involved in taking a deeper look, it's essential to also examine the pupil's experiences in lessons. For example, are some of the reported difficulties, which may be variable across subjects, linked with any issues that you can identify relating to your knowledge and understanding of the pupil's capabilities, your expectations of what the pupil can achieve, your assessment information and data, and your use of differentiation strategies as part of high-quality teaching? If the answer is yes or maybe, it's important to then consider the adjustments you can make to remove and reduce the pupil's barriers to learning in your lessons. Using checklists. If you are starting to develop a hypothesis that a pupil may be dyslexic, you or your colleagues may feel that it is now appropriate to use one or more SEN checklists. Checklists are a list of statements or questions that seek to identify a pattern of traits or difficulties based on the responses given. Whilst SEN checklists are somewhat subjective, and they rely on the individual completing them to understand the questions and statements and to respond honestly, they do provide a useful early step towards identification. Dyslexia checklists provide the opportunity for a pupil's pattern of performance to be reviewed against criteria that might be thought of as expected characteristics for a dyslexic individual. Dyslexia Traits Checklist. A dyslexia traits checklist includes a basic and concise list of traits that may be picked up in children's primary years, followed by traits that may be additionally noticed more typically within the secondary phase. The checklist also includes possible areas of strength to look out for, equally important. Talking with the pupil and their parents and carers. At this point, you may have collated a range of evidence. You may feel that it would be helpful to discuss your concerns with the pupil, if it's age appropriate, and their parents or carers. This could include a review of the available school-based evidence that we've outlined so far in this video. A basic screener could also be applied. Sometimes it can also be helpful to explore whether there is any known family history of dyslexia or similar learning profiles. Other possible areas of need might also be discussed, alongside classroom strategies and any additional provision. It is important to be clear, if using the word dyslexia, that at this stage it might be considered a possibility, but this requires further exploration as part of the graduated approach to SEN identification. Using dyslexia screeners. Screening for dyslexia involves using a commercially available screening tool. A screening tool will not assess and identify dyslexia, but will often provide either a probability or an at-risk score or a profile of strengths and weaknesses. Results from screeners need to be carefully considered alongside all other sources of information, data, and school-based evidence that has been collated. These tools are designed to be administered by non-specialists to individual pupils or whole cohorts. Some training and a good level of knowledge is advisable if this is to be effective, as any results will require a reasonably good level of interpretation skills. Most screening tools will ask the individual being screened to complete a number of activities. Some of these activities will be related to expected difficulties, and others will be unrelated to expected difficulties and act as a control against which to compare the results from the dyslexia-sensitive tests. All good screening tools should have undergone some level of standardization and testing to ensure the accuracy of the results. Screeners are a cost-effective method that can assist with identification. This is the end of this video. Parts 3 and 4 on this topic are now available to watch. You can view more videos on this channel in the About series.